All right, good morning, everybody. This is the Public Safety Committee. I'm Jack Weiss, Greg Smith, Dennis Dine, and Ed Reyes are present. And before we begin this morning, I would like to ask everyone to join in a moment of silence for Police Officer Randy Simmons. A moment of silence, please. Thank you all very much. Mr. White and colleagues, going through the agenda, 3 of the items need a hearing. Item number 3 does not appear to need a hearing. We could move item number 3 on consent, if you consent. Mr. Zine?
Yes.
Okay, so item 3 we will approve. Let's do the other items in order. We'll first begin with our weekly DNA update.
John White, City Clerk. Item 1, Police Department to present verbal report relative to the status of DNA testing, backlog, and cold hits.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yvette Sanchez-Owen, Scientific Investigation Division. Our current backlog as of the 8th of this month is 7,385 cases. Of that number, 497 have been requested for testing. We have currently 125 of those cases in screening, and 122 are in profiling. To date, the total number of cold hits for this year, 2008, is 39. That's all I have for this week.
Thank you. Last week I was hopeful that Lieutenant Yu and Ms. Sanchez-Owens would provide my office with the numbers that you verbally presented last week relating to, I guess it was by division and also by council district. Sounds
I have them.
You have that today.
Yes.
Great. Could you verbally just run down those by council district? And Mr. Reyes wasn't here when we had the discussion last week. You may want to just touch on those division numbers again, just because they were interesting. But if you could tell us what you've got, and we'd really appreciate it.
Okay, now on our list, Lieutenant Morris from Robbery Homicide Division Cold Case Unit. On our list that I promised you we would have by council district, we broke it down per hit, and our information doesn't have the totals. I think Ms. Sanchez-Owens gave you the totals per division last week.
Oh, okay, got it.
But I promised you this information so that you could see what the status of the offenders were and how it was broken down by council district, and that I have, but it's just not in total numbers.
That's fine. Why don't you describe for us what you have?
Okay, what I have is, for each council district, I have the hits dating back from 1996 through the present by year, or as far back as we go. Based on council district, it may go back. Is the 96 the furthest, Dave, that it goes back? Is that because I noticed on a couple of these, 96 is the latest, or the earliest that it goes back.
David DiLiberto with the police department. Basically, what you're going to be looking at is you're going to be looking at all the hits for last year and this year, and I believe it's dating back to 1996. Yes.
Okay. So what he queried was for last year and this year, and I noticed that they go back as far back as 96, and so each council district is different as far as how many hits. They're broken down by RD, as well as the type of crime and the type of hit, offender hit versus case-to-case hit, and it also has the status of the offender, whether the offender is in custody, not in custody, out on probation or parole, or the status is unknown. And when you note that when we note that the status is unknown, it's because of the information that was lacking in our computer system as to CII numbers, FBI numbers, but we are still working on rectifying or identifying what the status of those people are that are unknown right now.
Can you just for example purposes, just tell us what the numbers look like in one council district? Let's just start with one since it's probably on the top, and
Okay.
he's here.
Council District 1, we show a total of 11 hits from 1996 through 2007. There are a couple in 96, one in 99, one in 2003, two in 2004, one in 2005, one 2006, and three from 2007. And the types of crime are rape, lewd acts, murder, and burglary. And there are, all of them are offender hits with the exception of one. One is a case-to-case hit, which is from 2007. And there are 5 offenders who are in custody, currently in custody. And there are 4 that are on probation, or out on probation or parole. And then we have one, the status is unknown based on the information that we have.
Got it. Okay, so if you give that to Ms. Stengel, we'll make sure it's provided to all the members of the council. Are there any questions on the?
Compared to the other council districts, those numbers,
These numbers,
do they pan out similar in other council districts?
no. There are quite extensive, parks area is quite extensive. It goes on to 2 pages, as well as
Councilwoman Perry,
Perry.
That's the 9th?
the 9th and the 8th.
Yeah, the 8th and the 9th. And then the 12th is a little bit more extensive than, say, 1.
How's 3?
3 is,
Just picking a number at random.
3 is moderate in comparison to the others. It's about half the list of 8 and 9.
What was interesting was, we will look at that, but could you once again just provide us, do you have the numbers that you provided us with last week? No?
Did not bring
On
them with me.
the divisions? Because that was interesting, because it is, I mean, all of our council districts, we have, the boundaries are artificial, right? I mean, so just because
Yeah.
something might technically fall within District 1, but if it happens in CD 14 or CD 13, it has an impact there, and so it was an interesting, we want to see the council numbers, and I'm going to pass them out to every member of the council, but I'll also want Ms. Sanchez-Owens' numbers, because I think that paints a slightly more realistic picture of the entirety of a community.
Right, and I was just going to say that the political boundaries has nothing to do with community boundaries.
Right.
So that'll be shown too.
And then police boundaries, you have 5 stations,
I have 6 divisions.
6 divisions. I have 1, so it doesn't really mix as we would assume.
Yeah.
Now, we do have them broken down by division. However, he didn't make copies of that. We have, but I can give you my copy, and you can make copies from
give,
that.
Give it
and
to Ms. Stengel, and I'll make sure it's distributed to everybody.
Okay.
And, I mean, I guess the best thing to do is just to get the data out to all the council members and their staff so they can see how it works. Anything else that you all wanted to present today? Any questions that any of you have? Colleague?
And are we reducing, we have 7,385 backlog. Is that number going down? Because every time it seems to be very large. Are we getting any progress, or is it staying around the same with new cases coming in?
It's staying around the same. For instance, the period ending February 1st, the number was 7,376, so it's gone up by 9 in a week.
So that new cases that have come forward.
Yes, sir.
And what's the solution other than Mr. Weiss's generosity with the contribution of funds? Do we have any other solutions to bring those numbers down? As we keep getting more cases in the system, it's not clearing out, it's just continuing to build, even with the contribution of significant dollars. Do you have a solution to that?
We're approaching it from a number of different standpoints. One is we're looking at new automation that will help us streamline and move the samples through a process faster.
It takes a lot of time now.
Yes, it does. The other thing that we are pursuing is the possibility of some donations to help us outsource more. We also take advantage of state and federal grants to assist us with the backlog. And then just looking at our own processes and looking at what's out there technology-wise to see if there's anything else we can do to speed things up and
Mr.
process more.
Ms. Sanchez-Owens is a diplomat, and she gave you a
Tell me the
diplomatic
truth.
answer. What I'll give you is a copy of a letter that I've sent to the mayor that outlines what you actually need to do in terms of the city budget to eliminate the backlog. And in sum, there are two things you need to do. One is you need to outsource, but outsourcing can only cover a portion of what we're talking about. It's backlog-related stuff.
Right.
The other thing that you need to do, in my view, is hire up criminalists at the crime lab so that every lab station at the crime lab and at Piper Tech, which the police department agreed with my request to keep the Piper Tech lab space open rather than shut it down.
Right.
Every station needs to be staffed for every shift. Right now, we have more station space than we have people to staff during the shifts. But the lab, like the police department, is something where you can't just double or triple the number of criminalists in 1 year, just as you can't double the number of cops in 1 year. There's a funnel. You need to hire a certain number of people so they can be properly trained and get with the program. If you ramp that up, it would literally take you 3 years till you got to the point of full staffing in terms of the capacity they have. It's about 3 years. And it would cost roughly $10 million general fund dollars. And I'm going to give you a copy of that so that you can see how you need to do, that's $10 million to do both do the outsourcing you need to do and to hire the new criminalists.
And one more question. The sheriff's department, they do it not only for the unincorporated, but many of the cities utilize their facility. How are they as far as backlog compared to us?
They have an interesting situation in that they don't really know what their backlog is because they don't really get every single case from all the 40-plus municipalities that they serve. So they don't really have a handle on what their true backlog is.
But they do have one.
But they do have one,
They don't
yes.
know what it is.
I don't know.
But they don't know either.
I don't think they know either.
She's a diplomat when she called that an interesting situation, right? Because it's...
See, if we didn't know, we don't have a backlog. It's interesting, because I know that none of the small cities have labs, so they either farm it out or send it to the sheriff's department. And that new facility was supposed to accommodate state-of-the-art. Is state-of-the-art equipment in there, or do we have to upgrade it from when it was open?
We have some state-of-the-art equipment, but we also have some that we will be able to acquire with some leftover construction funds that were earmarked for equipment, but that money has not been released from the state yet. We anticipate that it will be released in the next 3 or 4 months, and then we will place our orders.
And then, is it Wednesday, that I remember you mentioned they have walkthrough Wednesday? On a priority case, detectives can bring it down on a Wednesday and walk it through.
That's for our firearms cases only at this
Okay.
point.
Walkthrough Wednesday only for firearms.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues? Once again, I appreciate what you all do, and going to get Mr. Zine a copy of the plan and keep doing what we can to increase your resources.
And find $10 million.
She's good. She's good. Thank you.
I found a secret plan.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Next item, please, Mr. White.
Item 2, motion raised Perry requesting that the Human Relations Commission, with the assistance of the Police Department, report relative to an assessment of the city's clergy councils.
And I'd like to ask Reverend Dotson to come forward and join these folks at the table. Reverend, you put in a public comment card, but I consider your contribution here to be much more than a public comment. I know you diligently and personally brought this issue to the attention of the council, and Mr. Reyes immediately took up the cause. So, Mr. Reyes and Reverend Dotson, why don't you guys take it away?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank Rabbi Feeling and the Commission, Human Relations. They've been doing a yeoman's job in trying to respond and put this into a context that can give us a constructive path in how we deal with the challenges when it comes to this point in time, which for many victims is a very tragic and traumatic period. And how the city responds and our ability to understand the depth of that crisis is critical. Part of that is how our officers are able to address this at a human level. And at that very vulnerable point, whoever's with the officers is really viewed as an authority or is given as viewed as a support to the city because of that very sensitive point in time. And what we find ourselves in is that we have folks, people from the cloth, different religions who participate in this. And this motion is really about how we as a city can be, one, more structured when it comes to the notion of the human contact, the issue of accountability, the impacts that are felt by the victims, and how we facilitate and support our men and women in blue, our officers who are dealing with a very sensitive place and time. I know they would have liked to have been here, but because of the tragedy that occurred in Winnetka, we understand that they could not be as participatory in the past few days, if not weeks, and we welcome their contribution in the future. But I want to thank all of you, and Reverend Dotson, thank you so much for your tenacity and your approach in dealing with a very important, I think, responsibility that the city has and how we approach these points of crisis. So with that, I wanted to ask some questions, and I'm hoping we can get some feedback to begin. But Rabbi Franklin, if you want to say something from an introductory point of view, and Reverend Dotson, then I have about 6, 7 questions, and then we can start off on the records. I want to just get to know what we have today. What are the facts?
First of all, I think that you have to know that we're in a preliminary stage of fact-finding. At your invitation, as sort of in the category of technical assistance, we're trying to find out exactly what is, so that we can then make some recommendations as to what there ought to be. The questions that we were asking internally when we received your notice that we were to be doing some investigation was, how does the crisis response team relate to the clergy councils? What is the status of clergy councils within the various precincts of the police department? What's the relationship of those folks to those who volunteer to be police chaplains? And those kinds of questions. Gary De La Rosa, Elizabeth Macias, Patty Villasenor, and I then met with Jim McDonald and began to do some inquiry. We plan to meet with some other folks as well. We'll eventually confer with our colleagues at the Police Commission, and I would imagine that hopefully before the end of this month, we will have some specific recommendations for you. But I think that you ought to be able to benefit from what we know so far, and therefore I'd like Gary to report to you in behalf of the Human Relations Commission.
Great.
Well, Howard, do you want to say anything first? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Last week we did have an opportunity to talk to Ruth Beadle, who has some pretty good background on what's been going on in terms of the Clergy Council. So let me go through my notes real fast, and maybe this will help out some stuff.
Maybe we can answer the question, what is the Clergy Council?
Well, that's what we're still trying to find out.
Okay. Okay.
It exists, there is the religious forum, and there are 7 forums, right, that LAPD has. The Clergy Council sort of rolled out of the piece that began in Southwest Division, where there's some reverends came forth and wanted to be out in the streets and trying to help the communities. So that sparked the idea of the clergy councils, but there are no regulations. If I walk up and say I want to be a part of this, I can. There's nothing I have to go through to show that. Now, what I did find out is that those that are involved with the crisis response team have been asked to go through their training, but they're not required. So it's a pretty open piece right now. Again, this is just a preliminary where we're finding out. So we haven't been able to, Elizabeth and I were not able to find out if there's actual charge. Is there some piece of paper that says this is what you're supposed to do? Okay? So real quick, what I did find out was that every division is set up to have a clergy council. Unfortunately, at the moment, out of the 19 divisions, 11 have clergy councils that meet regularly, 2 have councils that have been formed but haven't been meeting lately, and 6 have no active councils. And I have the list of the 6 if you want it later on. They are, however, looking towards, they meaning LAPD, is looking towards having active councils in every division. And to it, there's actually going to be a meeting on March 4th, which Howard might be able to give you some more information about, where folks are supposed to get together, right, Howard? And have this discussion about what its impact should be or where it's going to go from there. But from what we've been able to find out is every division wants to have a clergy council.
When you speak to the clergy council, do they have specific geographies, or they overlap?
Well, each division has one. They do have bylaws, and they have, as I was told, a civilian leader, but that's pretty much where they're at. And essentially what they're tending to do right now is work with youth programming without the doctrine involved in it, just that they're getting active with youth. That's where they've been placed, more or less. But in terms of crisis, are they right there at the beginning? We haven't been able to find that out. What I did find out was that the watch commander at any time of an emergency is supposed to roll out certain things, one of which is contact the crisis response team. The other is to try to contact someone at the, clergy division of the LAPD to see if there's any need for that.
And Ed, one of the things we're trying to do is to find out how inclusive each of these clergy councils are. We know, for example, in the instance that you brought to our attention, that there wasn't readily a Spanish-speaking priest. So what we need to do is to see what can be put in place so that each of the clergy councils is as inclusive as possible, representative of the community that they are located, so that there are no voids.
Thank you.
Right. And yes, again, we do know there's some gaps, but because there are no, right now, apparently, okay, as far as we've been able to find out, and as Ruth was able to tell us, there are no specifics that you have to follow. That might be part of that issue. But this is just the assessment part. We're still trying to find out some more information and get more of an overall picture of what's going on.
Now, do they use any city resources in terms of facilities, monetary? Is there any engagement of any type?
They're all volunteers. My guess is that they meet at a division headquarters, but I mean, that's the utilization of a conference room.
Okay.
And we've actually been at some, Elizabeth and I have been in some meetings in South LA, where clergy council meetings in the past, and they do use the division meeting rooms. About it.
Ms. Dodson.
A lot of it depends division by division. I think there's something organic in the clergy council that we rotate in Rampart from church to church. And I've encouraged Officer Beadle to utilize the resources of the churches, and so that the clergy council members get to know each other in their different houses of worship, and that's part of the community building. So, I mean, just about every church and synagogue has a fellowship area that can accommodate the size of the meetings. And the Religious Community Forum met last month, and Chief Bratton agreed that the way it's been operating so far is through the captains. And when you have a lot of turnovers and captains, as we did in West LA, it's hard to implement a clergy council. And so he agreed that through the community relations, Officer Beadle's office, and each division having a community relations office, that's the best place to plant the clergy council coordination, so there would be continuity. And they have a steering committee that met last week. And so there's a steering committee of the Religious Community Forum that's going to help with the Congress of Clergy Councils on March 4th, and to hopefully be available to mentor some clergy within the 6 divisions that don't have active clergy councils.
In terms of your, and I asked this question understanding that you're going through the preliminary phase. Bless you.
Bless you.
Salute.
But
Don't shake hands with him.
Yeah.
thanks for the warning.
What is public
Next to
safety?
you.
But given the what you've learned, do you feel we should have a screening process? I mean, because it seems to be very kind of loose. There's no real structure. But given your interviews and what you've learned at this time, should we have a screening process? I know That's something I just want to get a feel for
Well,
at this stage.
I believe that inasmuch as these are volunteer groups, that we really shouldn't be loading them up with a lot of regulations. But for example, because of what you experienced with Howard, it seems to me that one of the things that ought to happen is encouraging them, members of the Clergy Council and also police chaplains, to go through the training which is offered by the crisis response team, so that when Jeff Zimmerman is faced with a situation, he knows that he has available to him not only those people who have voluntarily entered the crisis response team, which is under the auspices of the mayor's office, but they can also reach out to clergy whom he knows have been trained and therefore will have a commonality with his volunteers, so that there is a more complete response to a particular situation within the community.
One of the things we're careful about with at least Rampart is that we respect the protocol that, the watch commanders to call the crisis response team and victims assistance with the district attorney's office. And we had one incident where one of our clergy council members was contacted to go to the scene. And we knew that that was going to create a problem if it looks like we're trying to circumvent the crisis response team. The crisis response team is there on the scene, and they do an initial assessment and a potential referral. And when you have a clergy council that has had some training and there is that trust and rapport with the crisis response team, then those referrals can happen in the event that you have a family that doesn't have a parish that they're connected to, but they need the emotional and spiritual support. That's where I see that it's a collaborative to help do the follow-through.
So
And I would also say, in phase 2, we're going to look at the effectiveness, and so maybe some of those questions will be answered then as we look at that.
Great. Just for the sake of the record, what comprises a crisis rollout team? Like,
Say again.
what comprises a crisis rollout team?
Well, it's headed by Jeff Zimmerman, who I think has one or two people on his staff, probably on a part-time basis. And he is depending upon his outreach into the community for people to step forward, volunteer to be trained by him, and we share some of the training responsibility at his invitation. And then he knows that he has this cadre of volunteers available when, in fact, there is a call from some watch commander.
Okay. We've been joined by our commander. Good morning, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Councilmember, good morning.
We did say before you got here that we understood because of the time and pressure that was built up and a response to the tragedy in Connecticut, we could not really get the kind of dialogue and interaction with the LAPD. So I thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you.
So I don't want to catch you flat-footed with all these questions, so to speak, but we are trying to understand how we can improve this whole process of responding to the crisis when it occurs in the community, when there's a shooting or there's a tragedy, and people of the cloth join the LAPD officer at that point in time when we are either consoling or counseling maybe the mother of a child who's been shot or another crisis that occurs in our city. Who is that person? Where do they come from? How do they communicate? What is their standing in the community? Is there consolation going on when you have that very critical time when the crisis occurs? And who are they? So I want to get a feel for how this city is behaving when it comes to that critical point in time. And so we've laid out these very basic questions with the intent of trying to support the men and women in blue, as well as do the best we can for our community and making sure we hold these folks, we understand who they are, and because they are volunteers, I don't want to be harsh, but also we need to be responsible in the notion of accountability. So that's the balancing act that we're trying to achieve here. From your point of view, can you just give us your impression on the structure or what you think are our strengths or anything you feel comfortable with, knowing that you're kind of entering this discussion, and we don't expect you to be prepared for this, but we want to get your impressions of what's going on and how we can approach this in a constructive manner.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize for walking in after this started, so I may say some things that have already been said. I think there are, as it relates to our relationship with the faith community, there are a number of redundancies built in, and I think that they're good. For example, we have the department chaplain program. We have clergy councils in most of our areas. We have the crisis response from the mayor's office. The types of things that will allow us to effectively manage those types of crisis situations that call out for resources beyond the capability of this uniform. I can tell you as a area commanding officer, when I had that role, that was something that was near and dear to me. It's something I didn't delegate. I met with my clergy councils, depending on what area I was assigned to, religiously, if you will, each month, and I saw the value of having members of the faith community involved in community policing. They have large congregations where we in the police department will go to a community group or a town hall meeting and address 40 or 50 people. They are addressing hundreds of people several times a day on the weekends, and in particular. And so the value of the faith community can't be overstated. They play a pivotal role in community policing and in our ability to serve the public. When it comes to crisis situations, the mayor's office has been very effective with their crisis response personnel. Of course, we have behavioral sciences, our department chaplain program. I mentioned the clergy council. So collectively, depending on what the nature of the event is, allows us to move forward and reach out for the right entity. So for example, if we have a car accident and tragically a family is killed, we may reach out to the mayor's office and the clergy council to provide the support for the family members that survive and to provide assistance and guide them to the extent that we can through the initial hours of what they're dealing with. That's a brief overview of the issue. I will tell you that it takes a great deal of work to keep the clergy councils active and moving forward. They're busy individuals. They have a lot on their plate, and we have an obligation as a department to make sure that their time is spent in a meaningful way. Those meetings need to be structured, and there needs to be action items and goals, and they need to feel as though that's time well spent if they're going to drive to the police station or we're going to drive to their church, synagogue, or other house of worship, that it's time well spent. So in summary, our relationship with the faith community is pivotal in our efforts to provide for public safety in the city. Our relationship with other crisis intervention specialists, whether it's gang intervention or the crisis intervention I met at the mayor's office, also pivotal in our ability to provide for public safety.
And the spirit of the motion is written so that we can establish a set of parameters, a structure, so that there is some form of predictability and also the flexibility to address some of the demographic changes that are occurring in parts of our city, the various traditional approaches that might have worked past 40 years, but because of these changes, we need to revisit and see how we can do that respectfully without creating tension, but more importantly, understand that we do have shifts in language, shifts in culture, and how we interact and interplay at those critical moments should reflect that new reality. And so how we are able to establish that rapport, I'm hoping we can move forward understanding that we are very appreciative and respectful for all of the energy that's there that's positive, but also understand that we need to look at the gaps and look at the points of transition in various communities because of the inherent tension caused by the unfamiliarity with language and or culture. And that's something that's very delicate, and I'd like to hopefully be in a place where we can create the protocols to absorb those challenges. And that's what I'm hoping we can see from the team here. Reverend Freiling, Gary De La Rosa, Elizabeth Macias, and Patricia Villaseñor have an amazing amount of experience working right there on the street. Reverend Dotson and others who have been engaging this process have perspectives I think we need to hear. And so how we move forward will hopefully give us a new environment, a different environment that respects the past but understands the challenges of the future. Is there anything else that we would like to add?
No, you can expect some recommendations from us as soon as we can formulate them, but we still have some more information to gather before we're in a position to do that for you.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Reyes, this was, you put the motion in pretty recently, and we asked folks to come and just provide a verbal
Right.
update. It's not in writing so that you would get the responsiveness quickly, but so that folks obviously will need time to work on it, to do as good a job as you want done. How would you like to handle
Well,
continue the matter for, and why don't you figure out how you would like it handled?
Well, what I'd like to suggest, I do have a set of questions, just for the record, that I'd like to pose that we can have answered in a report form when you're able to.
Sure.
And this would be basically just the first phase of fact-finding and understanding the structure. And then the more, I think, challenging and delicate would be how we move forward from there. But first, I'd like to offer the committee that opportunity to understand what we have, so we can move forward in a manner that's more constructive, that talks about the bigger picture. Is that something that you feel good about? Okay.
Now, Mr. Zine has a question, I guess?
A couple questions. The chaplains, I don't know, Father Mike, is he the chaplain in charge of the chaplain corps? Father Mike McCullough? And are we fully staffed with the chaplains for the department?
Councilmember, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if we have any vacancies at the present time or not. I'd have to check on that for you as to whether or not we're fully staffed.
If we could cover that also. And as far as the clergy council, you mentioned 6 divisions. What divisions don't have the clergy council in place?
Not that I want to get anybody in trouble or anything. But.
Well, no, we just
I
want to
don't
make
think-
sure that we're doing for the
Right.
community what we need to do.
Currently, those are Central, Northeast, Harbor, Mission, Hollywood, and West Los Angeles.
Mission, Hollywood.
In West Los Angeles.
I find it hard to believe Mission. Yeah. Clergy Council Mission. That's the mission. The clergy. Get the connection, Mission.
Can I offer, Councilmember, that some of the areas, some of which I'm personally aware of, had clergy councils and are likely inactive. And again, it requires a great deal of effort on the part of in my opinion, the area CO to nurture and bring that along. And so I would suggest that it's not that they didn't have them, it's likely that they fell into an inactive status, and we need to breathe life into that issue within those commands.
If I could just lift up, what happens in these divisions where there's not an active clergy council is sometimes you get opportunists that come into a situation where they know there's going to be a lot of media, and they become points for the family. And I've seen that a couple times where I know these individuals have mixed motives, and that's one of the reasons I'm trying to protect these families, to have folks that LAPD has vetted, and you have that trust and rapport.
So you could have a clergy council, then in affiliation with an attorney with a lawsuit.
See, that raises another question as well, and I have thought about it, but maybe we ought to put it on the record. Namely, as part of the protocols that are going to be developed or recommendations that will come from us, and then we're going to step aside because there is no responsibility that the Human Relations Commission is prepared to take on unless we're assigned to something. But I'm curious as to that initial call or the initial conversation between the watch commander and the family. Is the first question raised by that person to the family, do you belong to a congregation? May we call your minister, priest, rabbi, or imam now? And if not, that's a question that really needs to be asked, because that person's relationship with his family is so vital in terms of being supportive. So what I'm suggesting to you is, in addition to these organizations which we've talked about, then I think that we ought to look also in terms of how do we take advantage of the relationship between a particular clergy person who is the minister, priest, rabbi, imam of a family within that community when in fact that family has faced a crisis.
I'm following up with Jeff Zimmerman's training in Sherman Oaks to give a brief workshop with the new CRT volunteers, because a lot of them are social workers.
Right.
And the emotional, spiritual assessment piece of, are you asking, and in the crisis, when they're at the hospital and they ask that question, many of these families are so overwhelmed, they don't want to bother their priest, but then they need to call the parish. And the way it's asked sometimes, they say no, not right now, but that could be yes very soon. Mm-hmm. And, helping them to be able to make that assessment and do the follow-through is important.
And
That
just imagine then the
respect-
sensitivity that is expected of that watch commander to be able to maneuver the family through that at a moment of high trauma. I mean, there are so many layers to this. So you've opened up a very interesting Pandora's box, but it's obvious that the box needed to be open so that eventually we can take advantage of all of these players on the same stage at the same time.
On the flip side, though, we also, I believe, have a responsibility to create safeguards so that those who would want to be opportunistic,
Yeah,
those who want to be in front of the camera for that moment,
exactly.
aren't doing it.
And listen to what Howard's saying about opportunists, because we know they're all around.
And so those safeguards, to me, are just as important as understanding how to deliver the service or how to be responsive to a critical time.
Right. Therefore, probably out of all of this will be some stated expectations of what we want from a person who is a clergy person who is willing to be involved. It isn't enough just to simply say, I want to, but then for us as a community to be prepared to know that eventually that person has been trained the most effective ways, again, probably under the auspices of Jeff Zimmerman, to be sure that we are satisfied that that person is really authentically interested in serving not only his congregation, her congregation, but the community at large.
Thank you.
Well, so,
That's fine.
so we will ask for a written report back that will address Mr. Reyes's questions, Mr. Zine's questions, and we'll, I guess, start to provide the outlines of a policy. And I recognize Rabbi Freeling's comment that, this isn't, you're not seeking mission creep here. You're not seeking more responsibilities for the commission, but you're going to help facilitate a good solution. And Commander Albanese, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for, I mean, it's obvious that, you approach this because that's just the way you approach policing, and I know Mr. Reyes appreciates it.
Yes, I do want to say thank you, Commander, and to the Human Rights Commission, all of you, thank you so much for your, again, your tenacity and your focus on this. And Reverend Johnson, thank you.
But
Thank
I
you,
just want to
Reverend
make sure we covered Clergy Council. We also want to make sure we cover the chaplain corps,
Yes.
too.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely so.
Thank
Yes.
And we will be touching base with the police commission for obvious reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please
Thank you.
let Ms. Stengel in my office know when you want to come back to provide the update. I
I'm
know it's-
hoping that we will have something for you before the end of February, if at all possible.
Thank you for trying.
He always doesn't want us to sleep.
But for the record, we've been joined by Committee Member Bernard Parks. We've been joined by non-committee member, the city's copper avenger, Tom LaBonge. It's funny you're here because we've got a copper matter coming on right now, Mr. LaBonge.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you, Mr. White.
Mr. White?
Chair.
Item 4, Bureau of Street Lighting report relative to the recent rash of copper wire theft from the city's street lighting system pursuant to motion Labange, Han, Weezer.
Take it away, Mr. Labange.
Well, thank you very much, members. Ed Aberamian is here as the director of our Bureau of Street Lighting. Tragically, people are actually going out in the middle of the night and stealing wire from live streetlights. The Los Angeles River Bikeway, as you know, which runs from Fletcher Drive all the way out past the zoo, is now dark because someone had come out and would steal these wires. Heavy industrial areas in the 14th District, in the southwest quadrant of the industrial part of downtown Los Angeles, streets are dark because of copper theft. Also, in the Wilmington area, and Mr. Abraham is going to show us a map, heavy areas are without that light, and it's very costly to the city, over $1 million for us to go back and fix it. And tragically, they pull it out as the wires are live. And there's been a couple of instances where the fire department have come on the scene and the crooks left all their sophisticated tools, which Ed could describe, right there on the scene. We have a task force working. We have great cooperation from the district attorney and the city attorney, but Ed's going to give us a report and show us what we can do. Our next steps as we go to council to get an ordinance drafted to take action on this. This is not just a problem in Los Angeles. This is a problem at cities throughout the country. The cost of copper has gone through the roof, so they're taking it to salvage yards, and we think we have a way to try to slow this theft down. Also, I did brief the chief of police, who was very upset about this. He happens to be individually a fan of street lighting, and not only from its practical use of the lighting on the street, but from the historic style of it. And he has thrown all the power and weight. And Cap Williams here with Detective Mann, who's the #1 detective in the city, responsible for stolen city property, not just this. And it has affected other city departments as well. They've snuck into water and power yards and take big pallets. So it's not a small nickel and dime thing. This is a major $1 million problem. Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Ed?
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Your Associate Director.
Ed Ibrahimian, Director of Bureau of Street Lighting. I have with me my Assistant Director, Norma Sahakian. Good morning, Council members. I think Council Member Tom Labange more or less summarized the report, but just to give you an idea, we've had 320 incidents throughout the city. And so far we are missing 720,000 feet of wire from city's street lighting system. That's 720,000 feet of wire. It's impacting approximately 1,700 street lights throughout the city. It will cost us about $1.2 million to go back, install the wire, harden the pull boxes. I brought with me a map that more or less shows the incidents. I'm not sure if it's visible from there, the red dots. The incidents are in CD1, CD4, CD9, CD10, CD13, CD14, and CD15. We've met a couple of times with the task force members during last 2 months. The task force members consist of Bureau of Street Lighting, the Police Department, the Board Office, Bureau of Street Services, CLA's Office, City Attorney's Office, GSD, DOT, DWP, and also District Attorney's Office. We came up with the recommendations. I think you have the report, a set of recommendations. The notable ones are we are going to install lockable pull boxes out there. We're going to specify new kind of pull boxes where we have a couple of bolts that hold the lids of the pull boxes in place so they're not easily opened. We're looking at maybe marking our copper wire, City of LA imprint on the copper wire. We're looking at imposing proposed legislation to impose record-keeping requirements for the scrap yards, as such as thumbprint, ID, photocopy, vehicle license, and statements from the customers who are bringing metal to the scrap yards. We're looking at contacting other cities in the region to see if they have been impacted also. And also we're looking at maybe possibly using different type of wire that doesn't have much copper in it. It's an alloy, it's a different type of wire. With that, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have, or if LAPD has anything to add.
Mr. Lawrence, you want to begin with it?
No, I just would just say if Captain Williams would want to just give an overview, and maybe Detective Mann, how serious this problem is, and how they work and respond, and also General Services here, which responds to city buildings, because they have had great theft of city buildings in this property.
Good morning, Captain Williams. I'm Commanding Officer of Commercial Crimes Division, and that division has over citywide jurisdiction in certain crimes in this matter. And also is Detective Tom Mann, who is the metals coordinator for the city and police department. Most of the information has been provided. One thing that we're doing as the police department is we believe in trying to get that information out to the community members where they can be eyes and ears for us to call the police department and have us respond and arrest those individuals who are involved in this criminal activity. To this date, specifically for the copper wire crimes, we've arrested 3 individuals as of 1/11/08, and majority, if not all of those arrests have been in the Newton area of the city. We have put out circulars to the areas involving the police officers, and also at the request of Council Member Weezar's office, we've put out community circulars that we're prepared to put out to the area so that the community members can see those documents too. We've also asked the community to call the police, use 911. A majority of these crimes can be constituted as a grand theft because of the copper and also because of all the other time, labor, and so forth. So it's over $400, and so we can go towards a felony for filing on these individuals. So that, in addition with working with our partners in the parks and general services, we're trying to address that by information to the officers and also to the community. And Tom, do you have any additional? Yes.
There's one question, and it's a legal question, so it's possible that possible you know the answer, but perhaps you don't, which is, well, first of all, has there been a prosecution of anyone from this type of crime?
Detective Mann, Commercial Crimes Division. Yes, there has. Since the problem has started, Newton Division has made 3 arrests. The last case that was prosecuted, the suspect pled out to 3 years of state prison for grand theft, and it was also felony vandalism to the...
Was there a restitution order in the case?
I believe so, but I'm not sure.
I mean, is that something that the law permits in these cases, and is that something that is being sought aggressively in court? I mean, it truly seems like the least that you can do in this case is requiring someone to pay the city back.
Yes, it's usually a stipulation that in a plea agreement that there's restitution made. However, the 3 suspects that were arrested in Newton for the metal theft are transient type people. So,
I'm sorry, go ahead, colleagues. Your questions? I know Mr. Smith.
I've already heard it. I've already heard this in another committee, so
okay.
I'm satisfied.
Mr. Zine?
Yeah, I haven't heard it before, but I don't know if we're doing enough publicity to the general public about the magnitude of this $1.26 million. The publicity, have we done an outreach to inform the public of this situation?
We've had press conferences, well-covered, well-attended press conferences, and people have got this word out. We are letting our neighborhood councils know on this. This is, I think, one of the things, too, and I think Detective Mann and Captain Williams will tell you, theft of city property, vandalism of city property goes sometimes in currents, and we may be reaching a current where it's going to get a little higher. With the cost of what this pays and the salvage yards, that's what Chief Bratton at least expressed to me is it get tough on the, if I use the term, the fence, the person who receives the property, to make sure they're legitimate. They go on new and commercial residential projects, housing projects, and steal all the electrical. Just steal it, and they all...
Copper plumbing?
Yeah.
Council member, in addition to the press conference, we've been on NPR, KFWB, Channel 4, and I understand Channel 5 is out there today to talk to us also.
Channel 5 is right there. Turn to the right and smile.
Jamie Chambers in the chambers.
Good.
The issue of certain parts of the city seem to be impacted Is it because the systems are older, they have different, you look at the valley, it doesn't seem to be impacted like other parts of the city. Is there a different lighting system where opportunity is?
Well, I think in the industrial area, Dennis, I just want to let you know, because I have done some research on this before I came down, there's nobody usually there in the middle of the night.
So
It's
There's nobody.
more in the remote areas, and one more thing I wanted to mention, DOT uses more or less the same type of wire, but they're not impacted because obviously the traffic signals will go out right away, and it's much more visible right away, so they haven't been impacted so far.
And on the 3 arrests, was it done through follow-up, or was it done at the activity taking place?
It actually came in from citizen awareness, calling 911 and having the units respond. And one of the incidents, it was actually an obs arrest by Vernon Police Department that stopped the suspects in Newton area.
While they were engaged in the...
While they were pulling the cable from the ground.
You mentioned the lights, the 1,600 lights are out. Have they been replaced?
Yes,
repaired?
yes, half of the lights have been restored. We've used our existing resources, but there are like 800 that are out because of this problem at this point. That's why my report is requesting for some additional funds. It's not from general fund, it's from our own street lighting maintenance fund to be transferred to our accounts, because this is something that we did not program last year as part of this year's budget. We're working on them, and I anticipate all the lights will be restored if the money is transferred by end of this fiscal year.
And we have a fund for street maintenance, for lighting maintenance, the assessment.
Yes.
The other question regarding the continuation of new material, are we looking at new materials?
Yes.
To maybe stop the activity? From
Yes, as I mentioned, for 60, 70 years, we've only used concrete pool boxes in the city, and you've seen it all over the sidewalks throughout the city. And actually, during the press conference, a reporter asked me about lockable pool boxes, and this is something that we haven't done here in the city of LA, but we are beginning to evaluate a couple of pool boxes that have locks, special bolts that only our own maintenance crews will have access to it, and we are going to specify the new pool boxes. That's something that we've already looked at and we are going to do. A couple of other items is to have an imprint of City of LA on the wire, on the installation of the wire. Now, I'm not sure if that will work. I think it's going to be costly, but that's something else, one of the recommendations that we are going to look into.
And the laws that you mentioned, how far along is that in the process of the legislation that you're talking about?
I know City Attorney was supposed to be here. City Attorney is working closely with the District Attorney to put this legislation in place. I understand Arizona has this legislation similar to this already in place, so we're thinking to do something. I hope City Attorney was here to answer your question.
Mr. Zine, Senator Calderon has legislation, and our city attorney's office is tracking it in Sacramento. Sandra Strezak, the liaison officer up there, so that is local. Because Montebello had the same problem too. It's little cities that are having this problem. It's wiping them
What
out.
happened is those locations that pay for the copper, when you turn that in, obviously I can throw in the trash can, they want to redeem it somehow, they would be required to obtain information, which may put an end to some of this activity.
The scrap yards.
The scrap
That's
yards.
correct.
They'd all be required to get information from the person bringing that material to the scrap yard.
That's correct, yeah.
We can model this basically the same way we do the pawn shops.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Require them to do the same kind of thing, so.
Yeah.
Mr. Reyes?
I know in the city we have historic overlay zones. They're calling out for historic lights. Are the poles we're ordering, are we designing them so that they can be tampered or they can get to the wires, or are they just coming from the pole boxes?
They're all coming from the pool boxes at this point. As I mentioned, all of our future projects, and including the Cypress project, we will be installing the lockable pool boxes. And I think that's the first, have it tamper-proof so they can have access, because that's how they're stealing the wires. Basically, they remove the lids, and they disconnect it from the other end. Sometimes they don't, and they just pull the wire out and run away with the wire. So if we make the pull box lids lockable, I think that will kind of stop the thieves from...
And just for the sake of clarity, the pull box lids are separate location from the actual pole?
Yes, next to each pole we have a pull box, and the
Okay.
wires come to the pull box, and from the pull box goes into the pole itself.
Okay, well.
So we have.
Thank you very much.
So we have Mr. Bunch, we have a report in front of us, right?
Right.
That was going
Let's
through.
go forth to council.
All the committees, so we will, as a committee, approve, which report is it, Mr. White? There are a couple?
You have two items before you. You have the Bureau of Street Lighting report with its recommendations. You also have actions taken by the Public Works Committee last week.
So we'll concur with the Public Works recommendations, and is the street lighting report a note and file or an approval?
No, it has actions to be taken that are,
So we'll do all of that.
Councilmember, there's one technical adjustment, corrections I wanted to make, and that has to do with recommendation 1 and 2 for the record. That's to transfer funds from Fund number 347. The correct numbers should be from Fund 347, Department 50, Account C600, for both recommendation number 1 and number 2.
It's
And
not
again,
general fund.
street lighting- No, it is Street Lighting Maintenance Assessment Fund.
All right.
That'll take care of the repairs that you need to do.
For this fiscal year,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you. And also, Mr. Weiss, and I think Mr. Reyes, there was an incident some years ago, but in a recent past, where they actually stole the brass streetlights off the Hyperion Bridge, which is terrible. So this is something we got to get real tough on, let people know, and make sure that they, A, don't get hurt, because they're going to get hurt, and B, the public won't get hurt in the liability, because if it's a lit street, and then all of a sudden the lights are out and there's a crime, they'll come back at us saying, why weren't the streets lit?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Labange, for being so aggressive and passionate on this issue.
Oh, thank
being
you.
the reason that,
Light the way.
you know. Can we strike those from the record? I mean, come on. You know, it's really, it's to your benefit, both of you. You don't want to be. All right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Unless there are any more bad puns, the committee is adjourned.
Let me just ask one thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I thought we were done.
I'm sorry. No.
Oh, he's got one question.
One question.
Watch out, Mr. Labange. You may want to stick around. Mr. Parks has one question.
I was just, because I was out, I just wanted to know, on setting up a system for this as it relates to the recycling, is it something going to be similar to how we deal with pawn shops?
Maybe the police
Yes, sir.
department can respond.
Right now, the scrapyards are under Section 21600 series of the Business and Professional Code, where any industrial-type metals that come through the yard has to record the driver's license of the person that sells the material, plus write down the license number of the vehicle that brings the material into the yard. The new legislation that the city attorney and the district attorney is working on is going a little bit farther, where they're requiring a photograph of the person and also a thumbprint. And this is to avoid people that will come in with the false driver's license that you can get on the street. And when you contact them and try to inquire if they sold the materials, they have no idea what you're talking about. So with the photograph, it makes a positive ID when you come across the stolen materials in the scrapyard.
And then 1B, is this state legislation or is this going to be local?
It's state legislation.
Thank you.
State legislation.
Okay, and with that single question from our former Chief Copper, we're adjourned. All right.
That'll be stricken from the record.
What? No, he was, I thought, Reverend, are you here making general public comment?
How you doing,
I
man?
apologize.
How's the
Mr.
family
Stein.
doing?
Folks, I apologize, yeah, please come forward, Reverend Dustin. I thought that your comment card was in on the earlier item. Captain, I apologize, I just apologize, but the Reverend wants to make his public comment, and so let's let him do that, and take it away, Reverend Dotson.
Just briefly, Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer had gang-related legislation that passed through the Senate, and right now it's in the House. Congressman Miller is the chair of the full committee, and H.R. 3352 is an intervention and prevention bill, and it's stuck in subcommittee. And I don't know, as a city of L.A., if we could, send a letter to Congressman Miller urging that this be brought to the full committee because those are key resources, federal monies, that the city of LA could be using. There's also a bill that's in the Judiciary House Committee, and I don't know.
Well, we typically support these sort of things, and Mr. Smith is the chair of the
Not
committee.
anymore, no.
Oh.
But the city did support the Feinstein bill, which was in Congress 6 years until it got passed. And so I believe it's already in our city policy. You could check with the mayor's office who handles lobbying for us.
Okay.
And see if it's still in there. If it's not, come back to one of us and we'll.
It's stuck in the House subcommittee right
Yeah.
now, and it can't come back to conference until
Right.
it gets through the committee.
We previously supported the Senate side of the bill, and so it's in our package to support. But again, check with the mayor's office, see if they would send a letter out in support of
We
it.
do have a lobbyist in Washington, D.C.
That works for the mayor, though.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Reverend. That concludes the meeting.
All right.